The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Richard Blackwell's voice cut through the elegant dining room like a blade. My son deserves better than street garbage in a designer dress, pretending she belongs in our world. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting to see if the nobody would dare challenge the king. But what Richard Blackwell didn't know was that the garbage he was dismissing controlled the very future of his billion-dollar empire. My name is Maya Sterling, and this is the story of how one dinner party became the most expensive mistake a man ever made. The Blackwell estate sprawled before me like something from a movie set. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and enough wealth to fund a small country. I'd been dating Ethan Blackwell for over a year, and his father had finally agreed to meet me. What I thought would be a family dinner turned into a public execution. "She's been playing the long game," Richard continued, his voice dripping with disdain as he addressed his country club friends and business associates. "Targeting my son for his money, his connections, his name. But we see right through ambitious little climbers, don't we?" The untouched salmon on my plate suddenly looked as unappetizing as the man speaking. I carefully folded my napkin, fabric that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and placed it beside my plate. The room held its breath. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Blackwell," I said, standing slowly. "And thank you for finally being honest about how you feel about me." Ethan reached for my hand. "Maya, don't go. Dad, apologize right now." I squeezed his fingers gently, then let go. "It's fine, love. Your father's right. I should know my place." The smirk on Richard's face was worth memorizing, that self-satisfied expression of a man who thought he'd won, who believed he'd finally driven away the threat to his precious bloodline. If only he knew what was coming. I walked out with my head high, past the Monet in the hallway, past the servants who avoided eye contact, past the Bentley that Richard had made sure to mention cost more than I'd make in 5 years. Ethan caught up with me at my sensible Toyota, the car Richard had sneered at when I arrived. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said, tears streaming down his face. "I'll talk to him. Make him apologize." "No more apologizing for him," I replied, tucking a strand of his hair behind his ear. "He said what he's been thinking for the past year. At least now we know where we stand." As I drove away, watching the mansion shrink in my rearview mirror, I made the first call that would change everything. "Sarah, cancel the Blackwell Industries merger," I told my assistant as I merged onto the highway. Silence. Then, "Ma'am, we're supposed to sign papers on Monday. This is a $2 billion deal." "I don't care. Send the termination notice tonight. Cite irreconcilable differences in corporate culture." You see, Richard Blackwell thought he'd researched me thoroughly. He knew I'd grown up poor, worked 3 jobs through college, started from nothing. What he didn't know was that the scrappy kid he looked down on had built Sterling Technologies, the very company his firm desperately needed to merge with to survive the digital age. I'd kept my ownership quiet, using holding companies and trusted executives as the public face. Real power, I'd learned, comes from being underestimated. By morning, my phone had logged 47 missed calls. Richard himself had called 6 times, the great Richard Blackwell, reduced to repeatedly calling someone he'd declared garbage. When Sarah told me he was in my lobby making a scene, I almost laughed. "Send him up," I said. "But make him wait 30 minutes in the conference room with the uncomfortable chairs." When I finally walked in, Richard looked nothing like the commanding presence from the night before. His perfect hair was disheveled, his tailored suit wrinkled. The king had become a beggar. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, standing as I entered. "You have 5 minutes. "I apologize for last night," he began. "My words were inappropriate." "Inappropriate." Cut him off. "You called me garbage in front of your entire social circle. You weren't drunk, Richard. You were honest. Drunk words, sober thoughts." His jaw tightened. Even desperate, he couldn't hide his disdain. "What do you want?" "Public apology. I'll make one. Just. The merger needs to happen. Why should I do business with someone who fundamentally disrespects me?" "Because it's business, not personal." Everything becomes personal when you make it personal. I stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. You researched my background, found out about the foster homes, the free lunch programs, the warehouse night shifts. But you stopped there. You saw where I came from and assumed that defined me. You never looked at where I was going. I turned back to him. Do you know why Sterling Technologies is successful? 'Cause I remember being hungry, being dismissed. Every person we hire, every deal we make, I ask myself, are we creating opportunity or just protecting privilege? His silence was answer enough. Name one person on your board who didn't go to an Ivy League school. One executive who grew up below the poverty line. I headed for the door. The merger is dead because you showed me who you really are. This will destroy us, he said quietly. Then maybe it's time for the old guard to make way for companies that judge people by their potential, not their pedigree. Later that day, Ethan appeared in my office. He'd watched the entire confrontation on the conference room feed. I've been a coward, he said, taking my hands. Making excuses for him, hoping it would get better. I want to build something new with you, without my family's money or conditional approval. Are you sure? Walking away from that inheritance is no small thing. He laughed. Maya, you just terminated a $2 billion merger because my father disrespected you. I think we'll figure out the money part. Within a week, Richard Blackwell was no longer CEO of his own company. The board, faced with bankruptcy, chose evolution over extinction. Sterling Technologies merged with the newly restructured Blackwell Industries. Ethan accepted the position of head of strategic development, and together we began rebuilding the company on principles of merit, not privilege. Richard learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never call someone garbage unless you're prepared to be thrown out with it. 6 months later, Ethan and I were engaged, planning a small ceremony far from his father's social circle. The company was thriving under new leadership that valued innovation over inheritance. And Richard? He still hadn't spoken to either of us, though he'd certainly learned that sometimes the underestimated become the unstoppable. The girl from the streets had become the woman who owned the penthouse. The garbage had taken itself out, and taken everything else with it. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about the power of being underestimated, the strength that comes from adversity, and the truth that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And when they try to diminish you, remember. The biggest mistake people make is assuming that where you came from determines where you're going. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything. The empire you build from nothing is always stronger than the one you inherit. Because when you've fought for every brick, you know exactly how valuable the foundation really is.